When you can't leave toxic people, most advice about toxic people sounds simple. Just cut them off. Remove them from your life. Set boundaries and walk away. That advice works in some situations, but not in all of them. Because sometimes the toxic person isn't optional. Sometimes it's a parent, a sibling, a coworker, a boss, a partner you share responsibilities with, or someone connected to the structure of your life. Walking away would cost too much. Your income, your family stability, your social environment, your daily routine. So the real question becomes different, not how to eliminate the person, but how to reduce their impact. How to stay in the same environment without letting the dynamic control your mind. Because even when you cannot remove the person, you can still change the rules of engagement. The problem with just leave. People who give the just leave advice often imagine toxic relationships as simple choices. But life rarely works that way. Families have history. Workplaces have hierarchy. Social environments have consequences. Walking away from a parent may fracture your entire family. Walking away from a job may threaten your financial stability. Walking away from a coworker may not even be possible if you share the same workspace. So the challenge becomes psychological. How do you remain in proximity to someone without letting them influence your emotional state? How do you interact without becoming entangled? How do you stay present without becoming vulnerable to manipulation? The answer begins with one principle: containment. Containment strategy. Containment means reducing how much of your life the toxic dynamic touches. Not removing the person completely, but limiting their access to the parts of you that matter. Your thoughts, your emotional energy, your personal information, your attention. Containment turns the interaction from an open environment into a controlled one. Instead of allowing the relationship to expand freely into every conversation, every topic, and every emotional space, you shrink the territory. You interact only where necessary. You reveal only what is required. You engage only when the situation demands it. Everything else stays protected. The information diet. One of the most powerful containment strategies is something called an information diet. Toxic people often use personal information as a leverage. They take what you share and reshape it. They criticize it. They weaponize it. They repeat it in ways that shift the narrative. The more information they have, the more material they can work with. An information diet reduces that material. You stop sharing personal plans. You stop sharing emotional struggles. You stop explaining decisions in detail. You keep conversations surface level. Neutral topics, general updates, nothing that creates emotional leverage. This doesn't mean you become secretive. It means you become selective. Because not everyone in your life deserves access to the same level of information. Emotional distance without physical distance. Many people assume emotional distance requires physical distance, but the two are not the same. You can stand in the same room as someone and remain emotionally detached. Emotional distance is created internally. It begins when you stop interpreting every interaction as something that requires your emotional participation. Instead of absorbing the behavior, you observe it. Instead of reacting immediately, you pause. Instead of internalizing the comment, you recognize the pattern. The interaction becomes something you witness rather than something you enter. This mental shift may seem subtle, but it dramatically changes how the nervous system responds. When you observe instead of absorb, the emotional impact weakens. Strategic invisibility. Another powerful tactic when dealing with unavoidable toxic people is strategic invisibility. Toxic personalities often search for attention, for reactions, for opportunities to create emotional movement in the environment. If you become the most reactive person in the room, their focus naturally moves toward you. Strategic invisibility removes that focus. You stay neutral. You stay calm. You stay uninteresting to provoke. You respond when necessary, but avoid becoming the center of emotional activity. In many environments, toxic personalities drift toward the most reactive target. When you are no longer that target, the attention shifts elsewhere. Workplace toxicity. Workplaces create a unique challenge. You cannot always avoid the person. You cannot always confront them openly. And the environment often requires continued interaction. In these situations, professionalism becomes a shield. Keep communication clear. Keep it short. Keep it documented when necessary. Focus conversations on tasks and outcomes rather than emotional interpretations. When interactions stay task-focused, it becomes harder for toxic dynamics to grow because emotional territory is where manipulation thrives. Practical territory limits that space. Family dynamics. Family toxicity carries a different kind of weight. History, expectations, shared memories, emotional bonds. These elements make boundaries more complicated because the relationship existed long before the current dynamic developed. In these situations, emotional distance becomes especially important. You may still attend family gatherings, you may still participate in shared events, but your level of vulnerability changes. You stop seeking validation from the person. You stop trying to resolve old conflicts that never move forward. You stop expecting behavior that history has already shown is unlikely. Acceptance of the limitation allows you to interact without constant disappointment. Lower the expectation. One of the most painful parts of toxic relationships is the hope that the person will eventually behave differently. That hope keeps people returning to the same conversations, the same explanations, the same attempts to fix something that never changes. Lowering expectations is not pessimism. It is realism. When you recognize the pattern clearly, you stop expecting a different outcome from the same interaction. That recognition protects your emotional energy because disappointment comes from expecting behavior that someone has repeatedly shown they cannot provide. Protect your nervous system. Repeated toxic interactions place stress on the nervous system. Your body prepares for tension before the conversation even begins. Heart rate increases. Attention narrows. Emotional vigilance rises. Over time, this constant readiness can become exhausting. Protecting your nervous system means reducing how often you allow those reactions to occur. Shorter interactions, neutral tone, clear boundaries, private processing afterward instead of extended mental replay. You allow your body to return to calm instead of remaining trapped in anticipation. The shift in power. The moment you change your participation, the dynamic shifts. Not because the other person suddenly changes, but because the interaction no longer functions the way it used to. Your emotional reactions become less predictable. Your personal information becomes limited. Your availability becomes selective. The structure that once allowed manipulation becomes unstable. And while the person may still attempt the same behaviors, their influence over your internal state begins to weaken. Final thought. You may not always be able to remove toxic people from your environment, but you can remove their influence over your mind. Through containment, through emotional distance, through information control, through selective engagement, the environment may remain the same, but your experience of it changes. And once that shift happens, the dynamic no longer defines your emotional world. Because even when the person remains, their power over you does not. Thank you for watching. This is MindStickz.